They say that fate likes to disguise itself as chance, and that's exactly how Emma Collins' life changed. She thought she was just accepting a job, but in fact, she was about to find the most unlikely love of her life. A love that didn't come to bring comfort, but transformation. It's curious how sometimes life leads you to care for someone, just to show you that you were the one who needed healing. Many people believe that love stories only begin with glances and promises, but this one began with pain, silence, and resistance. Ethan Miller didn't want to be saved, and Emma didn't know she was about to save herself too. It's a story that breaks cliches and challenges beliefs, the kind that make you rethink what it really means to love, to insist, to accept, or to let go. What would you do if the love of your life taught you how to live at the same moment they decided to leave? This is not just a story of emotional romance. It is a journey about overcoming, acceptance, and new life after the accident. Living proof that love, even when it does not heal everything, is capable of changing the course of those who experience it. And perhaps, as you listen to this story, you will realize that fate is also preparing something to transform your own life. When Emma Collins accepted the job as a caregiver, she had no idea she was about to write the first chapter of an unlikely love story. It was just another job, or so it seemed. But fate loves to disguise big changes with small beginnings. Sometimes life delivers lessons wrapped up in simple tasks, like caring for someone. And there, at that moment, began a journey of overcoming and self-discovery. A silent invitation to see the world through different eyes. Emma didn't come from a fairy tale. She came from failures, from loves that didn't work out, and from the gray routine of someone who carries more bills than dreams. When she received the offer to care for Ethan Miller, a quadriplegic recluse, she hesitated. After all, who would be prepared to face the pain of someone who had already given up on life? But something inside her, perhaps a flash of compassion or an unconscious desire for a new life after the accident, made her say yes. A yes that would change everything. This type of decision, which seems small on paper, is what separates those who merely survive from those who truly live. We never know when an ordinary choice hides a transformation through love. Emma wasn't just accepting a job. She was accepting a challenge, the kind that forces you to grow, even if it hurts. And although she didn't know it yet, every step she took in that quiet house would be the beginning of an emotional romance that would transform not only Ethan, but also the very way she understood what it meant to love and be loved. Ethan Miller's house was large, but it felt empty. The kind of emptiness that doesn't come from a lack of furniture, but from the absence of life. Every room held a cold echo, and even the clock on the wall seemed to tick slowly, as if respecting the silence. Emma immediately sensed that this place didn't just need physical care, it needed human warmth. It's curious how some houses reflect the soul of those who live in them. If the heart is closed, the air also feels heavy. And there, the air seemed to have given up breathing. Ethan, on the other hand, was the living picture of resistance. He didn't want company, he didn't want advice, and above all, he didn't want pity. His hostility was like a wall, tall, solid, built brick by brick with the pain of a past he wouldn't let anyone touch. Emma realized there was no point in forcing it. Sometimes, unlikely love begins with patience and not with pretty words. She had to understand his silence before trying to break it. Many people, when faced with someone who's emotionally isolated, walk away. But Emma did the opposite. She stayed. She stayed even when he ignored her, even when the atmosphere seemed to scream, "Go away." And that decision to stay was the first act of courage in that love story. Because true love, before it is declared, is proven. And in the midst of that thick silence, the invisible seed of a transformation was born that neither of them imagined they would experience. Emma realized early on that empathy cannot be imposed. It must be offered. And she began to do so in a simple way, with humor. At first, her jokes were met with the same silence as always, but she persisted, not out of stubbornness, but because she believed that even the coldest heart can be warmed if someone has the courage to light the first flame. One day, when Ethan smiled discreetly, she understood. His wall was not made of stone. It was made of pain. And pain, when touched gently, begins to melt away. Over time, Emma traded nursing manuals for sincere conversations. She asked him about the movies he liked, the songs that had once marked his life, the places he dreamed of visiting. Little by little, his rigidity gave way to small openings, a calmer look, a less cutting response. And each exchange was a silent victory. It wasn't just a caregiver talking to a patient. It was one soul reminding another that life was still worth living. It's curious how, when we take care of someone, we end up being taken care of too. Emma began to realize that this job was giving her back something she herself had lost: hope. Ethan unwittingly taught her about the strength that arises even when everything seems lost. And she, with her light-hearted and insistent manner, showed that unlikely love doesn't need promises, just presence. What she didn't know was that Ethan's little smile would be the prelude to something much bigger. As the days passed, something began to change, not abruptly, but subtly, like dawn creeping in through a forgotten window. Ethan was no longer the same closed-off man he had been before. Conversations with Emma began to fill the silent hours, and for the first time in a long time, he laughed. The hostility that had once protected him now became vulnerability. This is what happens when unlikely love begins to take effect. It doesn't ask permission. It just settles in, dismantling defenses and rebuilding hopes. Emma, on the other hand, was also changing. Living with Ethan made her realize how ungrateful we are for the simple things: touch, movement, even breathing. Seeing his strength, even in the face of limitations, awakened in her a new form of love, more mature, more compassionate. She realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are not those where everything works out, but those where two souls heal each other, even if by different paths. This transformation was silent but powerful. Ethan was learning to live again, and Emma was learning to feel again. He rediscovered the meaning of life. She rediscovered hers. And together, without realizing it, they were building something rare, a relationship in which pain was no longer the end but the beginning. But every transformation brings with it a test, and theirs was about to arrive. It was almost imperceptible how love crept in between them. There were no declarations, no hasty promises, just small gestures, lingering glances, and silences that spoke louder than any words. Emma realized that she no longer woke up thinking about her salary, but about his smile, and Ethan, who used to count the days hoping that time would pass quickly, now wished that the hours spent with her would last a little longer. This is how stories that inspire love are born, amid simplicity, where the unlikely takes shape. What was once just a professional relationship became friendship, and from that friendship was born something that neither of them knew how to name. Perhaps an unlikely love, perhaps a new hope. Emma cared for him with the delicacy of someone who already understood that loving is not about fixing the other person, but about being present while they rebuild themselves. And Ethan, even though physically limited, discovered that love does not depend on the body, but on the soul. With every conversation, every laugh, he felt alive again. The most beautiful thing about this emotional romance is that it didn't have to be perfect to be true. They didn't talk about the future. They just lived the present intensely. And in that present, they learned that transformation through love does not require happy endings. It requires surrender. Deep down, they both knew that something greater awaited them. And although they didn't say it out loud, they felt that destiny, always mysterious, was about to present them with a choice that would change everything. True love brings not only joy, but also the burden of choice. Ethan had long ago decided that he didn't want to continue living that way. The physical pain was bearable. What destroyed him was the absence of purpose. But then Emma came along, and with her, a whirlwind of feelings that confused his certainties. Loving again seemed like a miracle and a curse at the same time. The man who had once waited for death now feared the next day, because the next day meant leaving behind the unlikely love that had transformed him. Emma, realizing the decision Ethan was hiding, felt the ground open up beneath her. How could she accept that someone she had learned to love wanted to leave? It was a cruel dilemma: fight against his will or respect his choice. The love that had once seemed simple now became a battlefield between heart and reason. And the worst part was that she knew. Love is not possession. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to see the man who had taught her about hope give up on himself. Many would say that love always wins, but that's not always the case. Sometimes love wins in another way, by allowing the other person to follow the path they believe is right. Ethan, firm in his decision, thanked Emma for giving him back something he thought he had lost: the ability to feel. And she, even though torn apart, realized that loving someone means accepting even what you don't understand. Their unlikely love now faced its greatest test, that of existing even when the end seemed inevitable. The day of farewell arrived without warning, like almost everything else in life. The sun seemed the same, but Emma felt that the whole world had changed. Ethan, serene, looked at her with that mixture of peace and sadness that only those who have loved deeply understand. There were no loud tears or eternal promises, just one last look that said everything words couldn't. Sometimes, the truest love is the one that says goodbye with gratitude, not attachment, and Emma understood that in the silence between them. In the days that followed, the house seemed even emptier. Every corner held memories: the sound of his laughter, their conversations at dusk, the smell of the coffee she made just to see him smile. But amid the pain, something new began to blossom inside her. It was as if Ethan's presence still guided her, reminding her that life was not over. What was once a wound now became a scar, a living mark of an unlikely love story that taught her more about life than any book could ever teach. Emma, over time, understood that the farewell was not the end, but the beginning of a new life after the accident, her own. She learned that acceptance is a form of overcoming, and that transformation through love does not end when the other person leaves. It continues silently in the way we look at the world. And when she closed the door of that house for the last time, Emma did not cry. She just smiled, because she understood that some loves do not come to last. They come to awaken. Over time, Emma discovered that love does not exist to solve anyone's life. It exists to reveal what is most human in us, what we still need to heal, and how much we are capable of feeling. Ethan was not a sad chapter in her story. He was the mirror that reflected everything she could still be. The unlikely love they experienced did not save his destiny, but it saved her essence. And that is the beauty of stories that inspire love. They don't have to last to be eternal. Some people think that to love and lose is to fail, but it is just the opposite. Love is the only investment that never loses value, even when it seems to. Emma now lived with more lightness. She saw beauty in the little things: the wind on her face, coffee in the morning, the sun touching the curtains. Everything seemed to have another meaning, because love, when it is true, changes the lens through which we see the world. And sometimes, that silent change is worth more than any happy ending. And so, she moved on. Not as a broken woman, but as someone who understood the purpose of having loved. Love did not prevent her from leaving, but it gave meaning to her staying. And deep down, that is what transforms us, learning to let go without ceasing to feel. Emma Collins walked toward the new life that awaited her, no longer Ethan Miller's caregiver, but the caregiver of her own soul. Because love, even when it ends, always leaves something in us that never ends.